This Cap Times podcast is brought to you by Exact Sciences Corporation, the makers of Cologuard. Learn more at exactsciences.com.
Michael Jones was just getting started as a teacher when Act 10 was introduced. The legislation would have profound effects not only on schools' financial operations, but on the morale of many educators. I'm Jessie Opoien, and this is Wedge Issues, a Cap Times podcast about government and politics in Wisconsin. This is the final episode of our Act 10 anniversary series, hosted by Cap Times politics reporter Briana Reilly and education reporter Scott Girard. They talked to Michael Jones, who is now Dean of Students at Madison's West High School and President-elect of Madison Teachers, Inc., about how he believes Act 10 has changed his profession.
So we're really excited to have Michael Jones with us today. Thank you so much for being here, Michael.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
We're really excited to add your perspective to this. So you were just getting into teaching when Act 10 happened. Can you tell us a bit about the time just before Act 10, how teaching was going, what you knew about unions, and sort of your relationship to them up to that point?
Yeah. So before Act 10, I was into teaching about a year and a half. I was actually, oddly enough, a freelance reporter for Cap newspapers in my 20s. Not a very good one, but I was in there, and then I decided to make a career change into 2008, 2009, and my first year was in Milwaukee. So that was actually the year that so that was 09, 010. So that was Walker hadn't been elected yet, but he was obviously campaigning, and it was my first time I was born in Milwaukee, but I had not lived there until my wife and I moved there for the teaching job, and it was an interesting time just because there was a lot of unions were kind of like this monolith. But it was kind of like this, I don't know, maybe it's unfair for me to say, but it felt like a very dusty monolith. I'd grown up the son of a Teamster. We were very pro-union in my at least on my dad's side of the family. I'd always had a respect for unions, but also growing up during the Clinton administration and kind of with the third wave Democrats, there was also kind of an ambivalence about unions, that they'd always be there and that they wouldn't ever really change. And especially being a Black educator, there was kind of like this vibe that I had to be a part of it, but because it was compulsory, it was not, but it wasn't like something that I was actively thinking about. In fact, my first year in Milwaukee, I specifically remember when we were going through teacher orientation, the MTEA's president at the time came in, and he was very much like, just keep your mouth shut, and as long as they're not messing with your salary or your hours, or if they're making you do overtime, don't talk to us. You're a first year teacher, you don't really know what you're doing, which was very fair. I didn't know what I was doing as a teacher. I think most teachers, if they're completely honest, your first 3 years, you're just still, even if you went to a school of ed, you're still trying to figure stuff out. So after that year in Milwaukee, my wife and I moved back to Madison because she works for the university, and I got a job in Middleton. So I was only halfway through my job in my first year at Middleton High School as a special ed teacher when Act 10 happened. And it was, and I was a part of the MEA, the Middleton Education Association, before that, but I wasn't particularly involved. It was I was proud to be a union member, but I was just proud to just be there, not get actively involved or know what specific things we were advocating for or fighting for. I was just listen, I'm just trying to focus on surviving teaching, surviving this this whole rigmarole and all the transitions in my life. And I wasn't really interested in like the politics of like, unions or union busting or anything like that. It was just like, just sign me up. I'll pay my dues, but I'm just more focused on the teaching.
And then I guess, what do you remember about your initial reaction to hearing about the proposed legislation that would later become Act 10, especially given your relationship with unions up to that point?
Honestly, it was a lot of confusion. Like I had to do a lot of like, okay, what's going on? Why are people crying? Why are people upset? Why are my colleagues like for lack of a better term, freaking out about this? Seems like things are pretty chill here in Middleton, like, or, like why is it that big of a deal? But then once I talked to, especially veteran teachers, teachers who are in different parts of their lives, whether they're on the verge of retirement or they just had a kid or they were they had a beloved one who was going through something like, dealing with cancer or, going through these changes that honestly, at that point in my life, I had not really been dealing with. And they were explaining to me how it affect them, how it would affect their ability to not only just live their life, but then that obviously affects their ability to do their job. And then I understood the gravity. I began understanding the gravity of the situation. It didn't really hit until like, honestly, I had a look through the contract and realizing like, okay, this could go away. This could go away. This protection could go away. And being a second year teacher, when you're like honestly making more mistakes than you're making good moves as a teacher, like anything that takes away my ability to make mistakes in a safe environment is scary. Like it's just so first it was confusion, then it was fear, because then I was like, oh crap, like I just made this big career change. I just put a lot of money into this. I'm not getting a lot of money out of this. Like no one goes into education to get paid. And they're talking about like really taking an axe to that. Like, what the heck am I going to do? I just jumped into this profession. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And then it kind of eventually morphed into anger. Like, why are they coming after of all of our problems? This is 2009, 2010. We're still in the recession. We're still in, a lot of economic uncertainty. We're still involved pretty deeply into our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm just like, why are they coming to teachers at this? Like, of all the groups, so then it was just like, then I was just pissed. So, it was a lot of emotions like that I had to kind of work through, during those first few days.
Did you grasp early on that if the legislation passed, it could really shape your career in education from that point? And sort of how did it feel to recognize that?
It was extremely frustrating because it's like, as a teacher, there are various levels of control, especially like being a special education teacher. Like I have certain control over certain things. There are so many things out of my control as a teacher, like what goes on in the lives of my students. There are certain aspects that I can really influence, but there's other parts of their life that is like, I'm not their parent, and when I'm realizing, okay, this is just going to be straight up harm for the sake of harm. Like it's not like meant to stabilize the budget. It's just meant to just like kind of take an axe to like this monolith that's mostly been a force for protecting people and helping people. It really made me question like, okay, do I really want to stick to this? Could I just go scurrying back to freelance writing or my job at the bank or do I, so it made me question, whether or not this was something I truly wanted to do. And ultimately I said, yes, like this is something I'm committed to. So then I was like, okay, if I'm going to commit to this, like, then I got to fight for it. And that's when I began like just doing a ton of research, and spending a lot of my time just talking to my colleagues and listening to them, and just kind of not much like knowing the quantitative like effects of it, but just the qualitative, like the fact that, okay, I'm going to walk into this space and I'm going to feel like from the moment I'm walking in to the moment I leave this building, I'm just going to feel like I'm under attack. And then when I leave, I'm going to feel under attack because all I'm reading is how much I'm a leech off of society, and how I'm being greedy because I want like affordable health care and like, it's like there's not a lot of perks to being a teacher. And then, the very untrue belief that we just like lounge around on during the summers, they're pulling out all these like, stereotypes or teacher tropes to say how easy we have it. And I'm not saying that it's like the same thing as like, digging a ditch, in terms of like physical labor or anything like that. But teaching is a physically, mentally, and emotionally draining profession. And you don't stay into this profession, and you don't get into this profession without being like committing almost everything to it. And you have to be able to have the right to protect that. If you don't, then it honestly makes your job not only tougher, but you then become a worse teacher because you're more focused on that than about helping the kid in front of you. If you're just worried about like, if you're just walking on eggshells the entire time, like no good teaching really happens from that.
As part of your activity during that time, to what extent were you sort of at the Capitol just taking in the scene, and what moments, stuck out to you still about the month or so during these massive protests, and how did it feel to be part of all of that?
At first, so being in Middleton, it was kind of like you heard it as a rumor, right? Like you just heard, hey, people are gathering on the Capitol. Madison teachers are getting involved. Some kids are getting up there. So at first I was just, and I graduated with a poli-sci degree. I was always very like interested in politics. So at first I just came there just because I was like fascinated. I hadn't been to a lot of protests or anything. Even like when I was in college, like during the Iraq War, like I was not one to march for anything, or rally for much. So like I was just kind of interested and fascinated. But once I got up there, someone stuck a sign into my hand, and like, people began chanting and people just began talking to each other. And then there was this really, some of the unique moments that I remember was like kind of, because I went there by myself, and then all of a sudden I saw some colleagues that I honestly had not talked with in the building, that all of a sudden I was having conversations with, like on the Capitol Square, and like that feeling of, oh, now we have it felt like we had something in common. Like we had a common purpose where there wasn't one before. So that was particularly impactful. But then I also remember during the first, I forgot if it was the second or third day when the Assembly committee began taking hearings, and you had literally lines out of the Capitol of people ready to talk for like 24 hours. One of my colleagues went up there, and I won't use her name, but she's a special ed teacher. She's a special ed teacher that works particularly with students with pretty significant disabilities, like, changing diapers and helping them with toileting. And like this woman like gives her all every single day, just like an amazing educator, amazing person. And she goes up there and she's in tears, and she's like, just like, shame on you for making me have to come up here and like tell you like that I deserve to be treated like a human being, and I deserve like rights and respect. Like the things I like, and the things she does is out of love for her kids, and then being told that if she questions it, she doesn't love these kids enough, or she's in it for the wrong reasons, was an insult to her honor and to her humanity. And I just remember really just being taken aback by the power of what she was saying, because they were trying to not just strip like certain rights or, change the laws, but, such a profound way, they're stripping at our humanity, at the reason we do this. And, I remember that. And then, of course, I was just, from then on, I was like, okay, I'm going to be here every night. Like, I'm going to talk to my wife's, my wife got interested, and then I'm like marching, going into the Capitol and chanting and singing and talking with people and being like, okay, what are we doing next? What's the next move? Is it signing this petition? Is it like getting in line to speak? One of the things that I think really fueled my fire even to this day was I was in line to speak, and it was like 3:00 in the morning. And for those who haven't been in the Capitol before, like if there's a long line, there's kind of like this waiting room, big waiting room. And I'm literally like on the ground, like doing schoolwork, like working on students' IEPs and like classwork on my computer, on my laptop, like on the floor. And I've been there for like, I think if I was there I was there for about 8 hours. So I was in line for about 8 hours. And around 2 or 3 o'clock, I specifically remember Robin Voss being like, okay, we got to shut this down because like, and I was literally like, either person 2 or person 3 in the line to like speak. And I had thought so hard about what I was going to say and being like, hey, this is not helping young educators and Black educators. And he was just like, yeah, I'm sorry. And he was just so dismissive. He was just like, if you wanted to speak before, you should have got here earlier. I was just like, dude, I was teaching and I had like meetings, like specifically I was instructed to stay at school, even though other people were taking time off because I'm probationary at the time. And I remember just being really, really just not just annoyed, but just like, I was just shaking with anger because like this guy just like dangled or, kind of dangled its power in front of us. And it was like, I have the power to do whatever you want. And obviously I have this power over you because you don't care. It was like, because I care about kids is the reason like I've been doing all this. And it wasn't to stoke my own ego. And it just solidified my absolute distaste for Voss and that whole apparatus. It was one of those like, okay, we're going to do this because we can do this, not because it makes the state better, not because it helps kids, not because it helps our communities or it's in the right direction. This is just because we can. And I will always remember that sort of that pathology in terms of of decision making, that if you're going to do something because you can hurt someone, that says a lot about who you are as a person or as a leader.
This podcast is brought to you by Exact Sciences. Join the Madison-based team working to lead earlier cancer detection. Visit exactsciences.com to view the company's hundreds of open jobs.
In the decades since those protests and since you went through all of that, has the law affected the roles you've taken on, including more broad positions like your current Dean of Students job, your roles with MTI?
Oh, absolutely. Because the law stripped away so many protections that you are always, I haven't had a year as an educator where I've had more resources than I had the previous year. Every year it's what are we cutting? It's not what are we adding or what are we doing differently to support these kids? It's what are we cutting? Sometimes it's cutting a position. Sometimes it's cutting a program. Sometimes it's cutting the supplies or access to technology. Sometimes it's cutting transportation. But so not only does it change what you do, like on a day-to-day basis, or what I do on a basis, whether that's how I figure out special ed supports, how I figure out Back when I was a special ed teacher, but as dean of students, like what kind of interventions we can provide and what kind of support programs we can provide. And making me and others have to think like creatively, how can we do the most with the least amount of money or with no guarantee of money? But it changes your mindset because it makes everything done in a cynical way. There's like, I would honestly have to say the majority of my decision-making process as an educator there's always this balance of, okay, I want to do something that can bring joy or improve the life of this child or improve the life of my community, but which is tough because part of my job as dean, and before I was dean, I was what was called a positive behavior supports coach. So I'm like, my whole like livelihood was around like trying to create positive and make school a positive environment, but it's always imbued with this cynicism of it can go away just like that. Just what Act 10 taught me was that like they do not give, like knowing like the powers that be do not give a damn about you, the good heart and your good intentions. And that can't help but like toxify like your intent, because you have to be guarded. You have to be ready for it to go away. You have to be ready for your position to get cut. You have to be ready for the money to not be there. When someone says they're going to fund you or they're going to support you, like, that's nice. It makes you smile right then, but then you automatically say you don't expect it to actually happen until the money's in your account or until the thing actually happens. So I think it just and that's just my personal experience, but I can't think of an administrator, a teacher, someone who works on the school board, someone who like works in MTI, where like, we are all in a, I won't say dystopian, but just like no one's expecting good things to happen. And that wears down on people. I mean, that causes that's a cynicism, and that's a kind of like a wound that just still festers. Even when positive things happen, like when Governor Evers got elected, I say this like, I was extremely ecstatic about it. But I wasn't like, oh, well, now this will change our whole education system. Like, I was just like, all right, well, this is good. Let's smile and let's dance, like when we're talking about Judge Dallett or Judge Karofsky or the Supreme Court, making certain decisions or elections going, I guess, my political ways. Like, I'm excited, but I'm very cynical about like good things actually happening from that. Even now, like, I know this is going to be airing in March, but like, as we're talking about transitioning and the Biden administration and like the Department of Education, Betsy DeVos no longer being there, like I have very low expectations or low anticipation that like the federal government is going to do something significantly enough that will positively impact the lives of my kids and the lives of my community, just because there's someone always out there with malicious intent, out to like harm the system just because they can, because it's a power move. And so I'm always just kind of on guard. And then I'm also on guard to make sure I don't transfer that to the children that I'm around and to my colleagues. So yeah, I mean, it impacts. There are ways I have hard enough time to think about ways that it doesn't impact how things go. It's like asking how does racism impact my life as a Black man or a Black educator in Madison or Wisconsin? It's like, I can't think of an aspect where it doesn't. So it's just like, it is what it is.
And sort of on top of how it impacts the day to day, Act 10 has almost become used as political shorthand by people, including recently here in MMSD related to negotiations with MTI. What do you make of that and how it's sort of become a figure of speech almost?
I think it's one of those things like, and this, I'm not equating this as the same way, but there are certain events in people's lives that feel, for lack of a better term, universal. Like anyone who is around then remembers that, even if you are tangentially connected to it, like you were still connected to it. And so like I think of like, for instance, like 9/11. Like I'm not saying Act 10 is the same as 9/11 by any means, but or like even like COVID-19. Like it was this thing we're all experiencing. Like no one's immune from this experience. And so Act 10 was has been a reasonable shorthand, but I feel like it's a shorthand that's honestly getting the further we are away from it, the less impactful that, the statement is. The act itself is still highly impactful, but the statement itself, because now, I mean, we have a lot of educators who don't remember what it was like before Act 10. I barely remember what it was like before Act 10. I was only a year and a half in. When my experience is different than talking to someone who's now in their 30th year of teaching, and Act 10 happened in their 18th year or their 19th year of teaching, because they had a whole, like the majority of their career was before this seismic event. So I think it's a useful shorthand, but I think it's a shorthand that honestly we have to kind of revisit, to talk about, to process this through and see all the ways it has led to a ripple effect of how we've dealt with things, because there are so many things between that still impact us now that impact. And like, for instance, you brought up, okay, we brought that up like when we were talking about the district, our district negotiations. I mean, as someone who's been part of those district negotiations, the reason we did bring it up was because Act 10, I mean, one of the aspects of Act 10 is that it empowers school boards. It forced school boards, even well-intentioned school boards that I think are friendly to teachers, to act in ways that harm teachers and kids unintentionally. And gives them the power to make unilateral decisions which don't require teacher input or employee input or worker input. And when you are systematically shutting people out of a process, that can't help anything feel like democratic. So like our current iteration of our MMSD board, I'm pretty sure I doubt any of them voted for Trump. I'm guessing like if you ask them like to a T, they would consider themselves good, diehard like Democrats or liberals or progressives or whatever kind of left-leaning like adjective you want to attach. But at the same time, some of the behaviors even with people in Doyle, because our district has systematically been starved of resources, because our leadership has been starved of these sort of things, because everyone's had to do more with less. We end up turning on each other. We end up like, having these sort of power moves done where it's like, okay, we don't have the time or resources to get everyone to the table, and maybe that's their perspective. But our perspective is, no, we're going to force our way in. And it was our way of reminding the powers that be or the community, hey, this is what Act 10 was intended to do, was to turn us against each other, even if, like, theoretically, we're all on the same page of trying to do what's right for kids in our community. Like, this is why they want us to fight like this. They're starving us so that we turn on each other. And we can't, you can't go the easy route of just letting processes happen and allowing others to attack us. Like, we gotta stick together. And if you say you're on my side, you got to prove it. And you can't, you can't hide behind Act 10. Because one thing I wanted to say this, when I was, about a week or two in, when the crowds were then getting massive, when we were seeing 100,000 people on the weekends, and people were coming in from all over the country to cover it and to also march alongside. And we were getting solidarity, people coming in from I saw like New York City firefighters and police officers, or maybe it was people who confiscated helmets and hats. I don't know. If then I'd be scared. But it became a national thing, right? Part of walking around and doing those marches, I would run into members of the Middleton Cross Plains School Board on those marches, holding signs, being like, we're with you, solidarity. And that made me feel good as a teacher. I'm like, okay, my board's behind me. The next year they tried to get rid of Just Cause. The year after that, they stripped worker protections. I mean, and when I spoke up on it, like at a board meeting, it put a cap on my career at Middleton. I was explicitly told I cannot advance for higher up because the superintendent did not like what I said at the school board meeting, which was, their prerogative. But like, that's one of those intimidation tactics that didn't really exist before Act 10. But then I saw, and the same people that were like marching around the Capitol, all of a sudden were like, didn't hesitate to remove worker rights. And then how does that impact us now? Like, you see, I'm in a district where we're not returning to school because it is not safe for us and our kids to return to school. Middleton, they're forcing kids and staff back into those buildings. And I still have friends who teach in that district. They are scared, not only for themselves, but for their kids who are immunocompromised and that they don't have a plan. And I'll just speak on it because if they say something, then there's going to be retribution from administrators and from the board. There's still people on that board who are from Act 10 and like who said, oh yeah, I marched. I'm solid with teachers, and then wouldn't hesitate to, I won't even say stab their workers in the back. They stabbed them in the front, So like, it's this act, like, it revealed a lot about people's intentions.
And that's a really good transition actually to my next question, because I wanted to ask you sort of bring it back to the challenges that educators are facing today. Some, especially on the conservative side, have said the way school districts have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic this school year has shown that teacher unions still have plenty of power where they exist. What do you make of that? And can you talk a little bit more broadly about the effect of Act 10 on teachers unions through to today?
So I would say the effect hits differently in a place like Madison or Milwaukee, because we are kind of liberal enclaves, even with the anti-union actions that might occur. Like, they're done in a different way. Like, I will say that, like, when I go to like WEAC, like state conventions, when I talk to educators that live in more conservative areas, when they even just do something like wear a red t-shirt or say, I support my union, they get threats, they get like intimidation tactic. They're intimidated. Like, they are not, if they say something on Facebook, they're told like, stay in your home. Like, this idea that like unions have the equal amount of power that we did like, 10, 11 years ago is just like, I would like them. I don't know what, I would assume those conservatives, if they're living out in the Milwaukee suburbs, like, have them reach out to a teacher and be like, do you feel comfortable speaking up for your rights? Or if you say something, like, people will just straight up come after you. And maybe I shouldn't say because we're in a liberal enclave or in a liberal bubble, because I'm getting, and this is hearsay. Maybe, this is just, when I'm talking to educators who aren't in Madison and they're in Oregon or they're in Sun Prairie or they're in Verona, like Middleton, of my friends who are not exactly in Green Bay, but outside Green Bay, like, these are small enough communities where you run into someone at the grocery store, people will say stuff about like that you don't care about kids. Like, that's, if you want to like really attack a teacher, you can, if someone accuses you of not caring about the livelihoods of your kids, like, that's an extremely personal attack. Honestly, and we got to hear too, right? The State Journal makes their hay off of editorializing how the unions are too powerful and don't care about kids. But like, I would say those folks like talk to some of my colleagues, some of my friends, like, who like get threats for just saying that they're union. come to the We Act convention when we're talking about certain things, like even just being like, hey, we want to support Black Lives Matter, and someone saying like, I support Black Lives Matter, or a teacher who lives out like in the Marshfield area, I support Black Lives Matter. But at the same time, if I put one of those signs up, like someone's gonna burn it like the minute it's out there. Like, the strength of our union has been decimated because of Act 10, and not in just our rights as workers, but also in our ability to just speak on things that we believe deeply about. And if I'm going to have the privilege of speaking to you, or speaking kind of in a safer space because I'm in liberal Madison, that doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore that's a reality. And I would say the conservatives who say that, unions have too much power, it's like, man, like they're just mad because unions still exist, because their intent is to kill unions. So our mere existence they think is too powerful, which is why I'm going to stick with them.
Outside of sort of the union aspect of this, how would you say Act 10 has impacted the teaching profession more broadly?
I mean, you both are in the field of education. How many people are excited to be teachers? How many kids I can't usually when I hear from a young person, hey, I'm interested in teaching, I spend my time trying to convince them not to be a teacher, or just being like, hey, are you sure you want to be a teacher? Because you have to deal with this, and this. Like, you have to deal with all of this. And some kids are like, yeah, I still want to do that. And it's like, then I will fight to the death to make sure that you are a teacher. Right. But you see the numbers even before the pandemic, teacher ed programs, like the numbers are dwindling, rapidly dwindling across the country. It's a national problem, and we can't all of a sudden disconnect that from national and local attacks on teachers. Why would you go into a profession that doesn't pay well, that has a hard cap on how much you get paid, and also just kind of craps on like your respectability and says, yeah, people can just walk all over you, tell you what to do, and ultimately disrespect you and harm your emotional, like people, like this is such a taxing profession. I've seen relationships be destroyed. Like people get divorced because of this job. I've seen people get estranged from like their family members, their children, because their children are mad because they don't spend enough time with them because they're grading papers until until midnight. People who lose they lose out on like opportunities to spend with their with their loved ones, or just even build connections. The amount of, I'm in therapy, I'm on antidepressants, I'm on certain medications, and that's because I'm in this profession that I love. And I say that with all the love in my heart for being a teacher. I'm not going to leave, but this takes a toll. I've seen too many. I see people who are leaving. Like I see posts from people who are leaving right this minute because they're just like, it's not healthy to be a teacher or to be in education in general. And then you're putting them constantly in harm's way, like in like COVID or safety measures and things like that. What does it say about how we treat teachers that like when the Capitol is being during the Capitol riots, and when those treacherous people like come in, the people who are arguably the most calm, at least from what I saw on Twitter, were people who used to be teachers. Either people who used to be teachers or people who used to be soldiers, because they've both been drilled on how to deal with shooters. Like Jamal Bowman knew what to do because as a New York City teacher and educator, he knows what you have to do in order to evade a shooter. And it's sad that like if we put a group of fifth graders in the Capitol at that time, they would have known what to do because they've been drilled within an inch of their lives on what to deal with hostile shooters. Like, that's the sort of environment we are sending people into. We are sending teachers into, our children into, and our teachers are getting paid $35,000, $40,000 a year. And then when they ask, hey, can I get a raise? How come I'm not getting the cost of living adjustment? You know, because things are more, it's not like things are getting cheaper in Madison. We're told that we're greedy. We're told that we don't care about kids, you know? So then at a certain point, you're like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to I'll go into the private sector, or I'll just go do something else, you know? And, you know, people who some leave for higher paying jobs. Some people leave for lower paying jobs because they're just like, the emotional pain that I don't have to deal with in terms of being a teacher. Like, I'm sleeping better. I'm like, people who leave the profession, they're like, I feel better about, I'm like reconnecting with my spouse. My kids are talking to me again. Like it's weird. So why would I want to expose young people to that if I want to make sure that they're absolutely positive and certain that this is their path? Because it can be a fulfilling path, but we do not make it an environment to be fulfilling under any circumstance. And, you know, that's just a reality. That's just like, and that's systemic. That's not like the faults of one particular person or one particular group. You know, that's not the school board's fault. That's not the superintendent's fault. That's just the fault of how our society approaches education and our lack of investing in it and our skepticism in it and our hate, like downright like hatred of the system, to the point that like, yeah, people don't want to buy into it unless they absolutely have to.
Yeah, you starting in journalism and then going to teaching, you really were not.
Man, let me tell you. Let me tell you about, you know, so when I was 17 and I went to UW-Madison, I was convinced I was going to go into foreign policy, like foreign service, State Department. It was one of the reasons I chose UW-Madison, because of their international studies program. But then 9/11 happened. And it was not like a good thing to be involved in like foreign policy and be involved in politics in like 2004, 2005. And around then I was writing for the Daily Cardinal. I was like, okay, I'm going to get into print journalism, you know? And like, you know, that was not smart. And in between then I was working as when I was freelancing, I moved back home for a year and I was a mailman. So like I've worked for the Postal Service. So like, you know, and after that, while I was freelancing here in Madison, I worked at M&I Bank in loans. So like I've been a part of like, I keep on jumping into really, really stupid like positions. So I'm thinking my next step is to like get more involved into politics, see if I can take it down from the inside there. Because it like seems like whatever institution I jump into is just like it crumbles. But you know, maybe that's just too cynical. I'm sorry, but like it's like Forrest Gump in reverse. I keep on like making choices.
That is a great reference. That is a great reference, and a good reference to end on. Besides me saying, "Go Daily Cardinal alums," got to get that in there. Especially as we have a Herald alum as the third person on this call. But
I cannot let this stand.
But we outnumber her. So,
Scott, you didn't tell me that we were going to be with a Badger Herald alum on this. I was not like, if I knew this was going to happen, I would have said no. No, I'm just kidding. You know how white people say I have a black friend? I have friends who wrote for the Badger Herald. I have some friends, you know, I know people who work for the Badger Herald. They can be wonderful people. They're not particularly good at football or softball, but you know, they are
true. That is true.
They are They have a capacity to be great, usually after they leave the Herald, because then, it's kind of, you get that toxicity out of you. But more power to you. I trust you. If Scott vouches for you, then I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
She's one of the good ones.
Oh, thanks, Scott.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for spending this time to talk us through this today. We really appreciate being able to have your perspective as a part of this series.
Thank you for listening to Wedge Issues. Our theme music is Oh, Wisconsin by Loxley. This was the final episode of our Act 10 series, reported by Briana Reilly and Scott Girard, and produced by me, Jessie Opoien. To read more Act 10 coverage or to get in touch with us, go to madison.com.
This podcast has been brought to you by Exact Sciences Corporation, the makers of Cologuard. Once again, be sure to learn more at exactsciences.com.